Hello and welcome once again to TaxCalc TV. I'm Andy North, the CMO here at TaxCalc, and we're back for the first of our webinars of 2023. This week we're going to be going back to basics and re-examining some of the core concepts around the use and application of cloud technology in practice. Now obviously the cloud has been with us for a good couple of decades now, and we're certainly not here to simply make the case for using cloud technology. But there are important thought processes about where and how the cloud is being used that are often being missed out. So I'm joined this week by Billie Mcloughlin, the practice technology expert at the 2020 group. Billie brings a wealth of experience in advising the 2020 member firms on how they can best configure their technology stacks. For those tuning in specifically to see my regular co-host, Dean Shepherd, I do have some bad news for you. Dean has unfortunately succumbed to the flu this morning and is at home recuperating. We wish him a very speedy recovery, but I'm pleased to introduce in his stead our very own Phil Cottrell. He's the Senior Accounts and Corporate Manager here at TaxCalc. Before we start, there's always some housekeeping to cover off. As always, we will be sending a recording of this session to everyone who is registered. Secondly, there are a couple of options at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, notably the chat and the question box. So if you have a question for Billie, Phil or myself, please use the question box, but that will not be seen by the rest of the audience, only we will see that. And if you want to chat among yourselves, the chat function is the one for you. But be aware that we won't necessarily be seeing those chats. So that's, if you want to communicate with us, the question box is the one to go with. So, before we start, Billie, would you be able to share some of your experience, give us your background, tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in practice, was in practice for 12 years. Qualified accountant, MTD came in, absolutely loved all the efficiencies that came with the new concepts of moving into cloud accounting, and the practice I worked for at the time kind of moulded me into this new role that, you know, there seems to be a lot of now, this cloud expert within the practice. Loved it to pieces and kind of grew within that role. As I say, so 12 years on from being in practice, I've now moved over to the 2020 group. And I'm a practice consultant and a chairperson of our new membership, which is called Tech Talk.
Tech Talk. So yes. Your role, as I understand this, is to go out and work with 2020 member firms. Do they have to be 2020 member firms to get your benefit?
They don't know. They can be a member of Tech Talk in isolation.
In isolation, yeah. Right, okay. And so your role is how would you typically engage with one of your customers on that?
So within the membership itself, there is the options. Obviously, we've got a lot of resources in terms of templates and things like that. But also, I can go out and do some one-to-one consulting with practices. So that may be to do with their current technology or any future technology that they're looking into. Right.
So do they ask you for advice on what technology to use, or just how to implement what they've chosen?
A bit of both, really. I think the benefit of this is that I don't work for a specific software vendor. We're not partnered with any, so the idea is that the information and the advice that I give them is totally honest, and, you know, I'm inherently positive anyway, but I will be very open and honest with the limitations of software if that's something that they need.
Right, I see, okay. And Phil, do you want to give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm our Senior Accounts and Corporate Manager. I joined TaxCalc in November of 2022. My background has been working within various software vendors over the past 7 years. I worked with Iris, I've worked with QuickBooks, and I've worked with CCH as well.
Right, so you've been around the houses, but you've come and settled with TaxCalc, and we're very glad that you did. Okay, so talking about cloud, talking about the kind of terminology around that, at the start of this, I was saying that some of the thought processes that some of the firms are out there might be skipping. What are you seeing in terms of when a firm starts approaching the cloud? Where are they at, and what kind of decisions are they making?
I think a lot of them are moving to the cloud because they believe maybe that's something they should do, rather than understanding why they're doing it. So I agree, there's definitely some thought processes that are being skipped. I think what people are starting to do is compromise on functionality within the system to achieve the benefits of being on the cloud rather than actually focusing on the software itself and the needs of the practice. They're doing what they think they should do based on what they've seen, heard, learned from conferences, online forums, and
right
as such. Yeah.
So and Phil, I don't know if you've got a similar experience.
A big mixture, I would say. So really the practices that I'm really dealing with are typically tend to be 10 staff and under. A lot of them tend to have been with a particular vendor for quite a sustained period of time and have struggled with any type of adoption of cloud technologies. Their real toe in the water of any cloud has tended to be in bookkeeping packages.
Right.
And so their perception of cloud can quite typically be that they're looking for browser-based software.
Right. And I think this is probably one of the key points is around language. And I've spoken to a lot of accounting firms in my time that have very different descriptions of what they say and believe the cloud to be. I mean, Billie, would it be worth just refreshing everyone and just setting everyone onto the same path of what do these terminologies mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm describing this to practice, I usually just say in layman's terms, accessing a system sort of through the internet is the best way to describe it, just because nobody wants to get into all the technicalities. It confuses people. But I think that's probably the most easiest and simplest way to kind of explain it, because there are a variety. You know, I see this as a 3-step process. I see it as you've got your cloud-based, your hosted, and your desktop. And that's generally how I would categorise it. And I think there is a huge mix-up between the three of where people need to be and why they need to be there as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, the way I understand and the way I've always talked about it is that if you've got a true purist cloud view, then the processing, the data is all remote. Whereas if it's on the desktop, you're actually working on technology that is in your office. Do you think many firms really understand it to that level? How would you describe that?
No. I think it's more that people are saw the benefits of this rather than understanding why they need to be on something. And I get, the benefits are also the reasons why, so it kind of doesn't make sense in that respect. But I think people understand that they can access it from anywhere at any time on any device, and those things that have been regurgitated for a few years now. But actually, what does that mean from the cloud perspective, and how is that different from something that's hosted or on a desktop is kind of the key message, and that's what people don't really understand. So I think they do appreciate, and I think a lot of practices now are realising the importance of it, but actually understanding why they need to be there, I don't think a lot of them have it quite nailed down yet. Right.
So what would you, if you had to guess, if you asked 100 accountants if they could accurately and to a detailed level explain the difference between, say, the cloud and hosted, for example, what would you say?
I think we'd have a lot of fun conversations. I would say less than a third would actually be able to, describe it in a concise way that wouldn't lead to like an hour of ramblings.
Yeah. Phil, the same?
Yeah, relatively similar. I think as well, probably post-COVID, I think there's been a shift in people's perception of why they want to be in the cloud. Their practices have shifted quite often. There's rarely a time when every single member of staff is in the office, and they're feeling like it's just particularly vital that they've got that home access as well.
They've got yes, exactly. So I think the majority of firms that I've spoken to have a particular set of needs, and I mean, I'll be interested to hear what you say. When it comes to the majority of firms that you've spoken to, what are they really trying to achieve?
I think efficiency is the buzzword in this. I think people just want something that is going to be efficient when they look at and the trend I'm seeing at the moment is people are not just looking at a particular software now. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but there is no reason your bookkeeping software should not be on the cloud. There are some software that categorically should be on there for so many reasons. But we're seeing this trend now that is kind of spreading across the entire practice. So people now want that efficiency where every department is interlinked because they're using these collaborative ways of working, which generally does come with cloud. So that is the trend that we're seeing that is almost forcing this shift. MTD's kind of had its day in a sense, like we're not going to touch on that today. It's had its day in the sense of that being the reason people should be moving over to the cloud, and that was the reason that practices were moving their clients over. But now this is coming internally. I think accountants have seen the benefits that they've almost given to their clients and thought, well, actually, we want this as well. You know, and let's try and get this collaborative working across each of the departments, from admin to tax to accounts to audit, and it's working really well for the practice I've been working with.
So they are getting that efficiency by having interconnected departments, by using the cloud. I know it's often been said about getting the cloud means integration, and I think that's quite commonly perceived.
Yes.
And do you think that's true? I mean, are you seeing that integrations, does cloud mean integration?
Largely yes, so on a whole it does in a sense. However, I think when it comes to cloud, you've got the open APIs. So for those of you that aren't aware, open APIs just means that it allows the language to be transmitted between the different software, because all software speaks in its own language. Those open APIs mean that one software can speak to another. And I think what the cloud does is it sort of allows those APIs to flow a little bit easier. The language is a little bit more understood, but it's not a definitive yes. You know, there are some really great products that speak to desktop. Might be a little bit clunkier. There might be a workaround, but I think that's really important to assess so that you're not just overhauling your entire practice for the sake of these integrations you've been told will happen, when there are actually quite a lot of cloud software out there that are not particularly friendly, and they're not open. They don't have the open APIs. They're not open to integrate with the other systems, and that's why the research is super important in that sense.
Right. And Phil, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Are you seeing that by default you can assume that your cloud technology will all integrate together? Or?
I think there is definitely that general perception within the market, and we were speaking about this earlier. I think if you're looking at certain types of softwares like bookkeeping and payroll softwares, you'll see much deeper integrations with a broader type of packages across an app stack. But I think there is the perception sometimes that all cloud technology will have exactly that same level of integration with everything that might be relevant to that particular essential piece of software.
But I know that I hear quite often that that's not necessarily coming through. One of the things one of the differences that I am seeing is the kind of conflation between the bookkeeping software and the back office technology that accountants use. Do you want to give us a little bit more about what you're seeing with the firms that you're speaking to around how they're, there's obviously reasons why you want your bookkeeping software on the cloud, right?
Yes, exactly. I think, and as I said earlier, bookkeeping it's just a no-brainer for that to be on the cloud for the collaboration with yourself and your clients and your whole team. And, you know, as Phil just touched on, the additional apps that you can get to help increase the data that you actually have in that bookkeeping software, whether it be data entry or producing some really great financials for advisory services, I understand completely with the bookkeeping side. I think what people need to kind of think a little bit deeper on in terms of practice is why you need the ability to use that anywhere. So when it comes to your client, obviously they're going to want to maybe raise an invoice when they've just left a job or something. But when it comes to doing a tax return or producing a set of accounts, do you really want your team to be doing that on their phone or on a tablet whilst they're on a train? I think, and what's really interesting is a lot of bookkeeping and payroll software, so two of the biggest bookkeeping software houses that offer payroll services don't actually allow that on their mobile app because of the fact that they see it as a really intense part of the process. So when you're doing payroll, you should have a lot more concentration than doing it on a mobile app. So that's why they only allow it on.
For that reason, so they've excluded it from that.
Yeah, exactly that. So they only allow it on a browser rather than on an app because of the concentration you need. And I think similarly, a lot of the things that we do in practice, it's for the same reason. So within practice, I would not want to be trying to, do the notes on a set of accounts whilst I'm sat on a train. I don't think it's really appropriate.
I think you're probably very right. Yeah. So I think then what we're saying is it's the application of the cloud is wonderful when you're looking for something that you can use anywhere, add in a quick transaction, very straightforward.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily want to be on your phone when you're doing something where you need to think about it to a great degree. So it's because I remember speaking to a firm who gleefully told me they had fully gone to the cloud, and what it turned out, they had zero. And all of the back office systems, so all the tax and the accounts production, was all very much on the desktop. That was completely comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Which is really, I think, this point about thinking through why you're using the cloud rather than just kind of going for it kind of blindly, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a centre point of the app ecosystem within a practice. That's probably why. So when I'm doing sort of an app stack with a practice and talking them through what integrations they have, generally, if they're using a bookkeeping software, that kind of does have to be the centre point, and everything kind of feeds through that. So I understand, and again, this kind of comes to that misconception that a lot of practices have of being cloud-based because their central point is, but the rest of it isn't. But I guess, but it doesn't really need to be, but people feel like they do.
Yeah. So what are the disadvantages of being in the cloud that you're seeing if you've got a genuinely browser-based piece of software when you're thinking about the back office?
Mm-hmm. So obviously there's the internet issue. If your internet goes down, you can't produce any work if you're using that. Let me just say a benefit. One of the biggest benefits that we're seeing is that there's no downtime when it comes to updates. So when somebody wants to update, we've all been there where we've downloaded something from a client and it's version 21 and we've only got version 19, and I think probably on about version 742 now, aren't we? I'm not sure, but you've got those constant updates when it comes to cloud software, which is incredible. And it's really exciting when you log on to this is me showing my geeky side now. It's really exciting when you log into a cloud system and you find these new functionalities and these new features. But one thing I have found in practice is when back in the day you would be doing that upgrade, a very intentional update, would have that downtime, we'd also be communicating with the team while we're having that downtime. We'd say, we're doing this because we're getting this upgraded version and it's going to have X, Y, and Z as new features. With the new surprise features, I guess you could call it, with cloud software, what we're finding is a lot of practice are not actually using new functionality, or they're scared of it, or it's getting used wrong. And the only way they get found out is because somebody in one department's used it and then it's trickled through, and in the break room, I've just been doing this. And actually, we're losing a little bit of the communication on updates of software, which I think is probably one of the biggest things I've seen as a negative from both the software house point of view, who've spent millions developing something that's not being used properly, and the accountant's point of view, who are missing out on using that functionality.
Right. So there is that element of sort of kind of loss of control when you come to updates.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Phil, would you have anything to add to that?
I would really agree with that. I think that's a really good point about that. With automatic updates, the enriched functionality can go missing. And you can end up in conversations with clients that don't actually realise that functionality even exists. So I would absolutely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I see. So in terms of the main drivers for firms that are looking to migrate to the cloud when they come to you, we've talked about the integrations. What would you say? Would there be other drivers that you would add to that?
Yeah, I guess obviously the integration is probably number one. Cost is a huge thing as well. Generally, when people move over to a cloud-based solution, the cost is a lot cheaper, which is...
because of the hardware cost, you mean?
Well, yeah, I guess hardware is one thing. Also, because of the way the cloud works, generally software that is created in the cloud, they can do economies of scale and produce it a lot cheaper than sort of your original desktop systems. So that is also a huge bit. And then the updates, again, we need to talk about the benefit side of that. There is no downtime at all when it comes to these benefits. It's just you log out, and next time you log back in, there'll be all these new functionalities, which I think is really beneficial. So I think the benefits are are huge, but I'm not saying there aren't other ways you can get those benefits.
Right. Yes, and we'll come on to that, exactly. I mean, from the firms that I've spoken to, and Phil, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but the big three that I hear about is, they want the remote access. They want to be able to work anywhere and have their team anywhere. They don't want to worry about security, and they don't want large-scale servers in their office, and that's the
100%.
The big drivers.
And it's the cost associated with those servers, I think, as well. Once they reach the end of their life cycle, it's actually an incredibly expensive upfront cost, particularly for a particular size of practice. That is a massive investment for them to have to make.
Yeah.
If at the start of that life cycle again, it's potentially a good time for them to change.
It's hard to consider why you would want to renew all of that when you can get someone else to pay for 100%. That and put it into the license. So we've had a question has come through from Barry, and he says, interestingly, do TaxCalc have a plan to move to the cloud? So it comes, good question, Barry, and it comes exactly at the right time, because that's really what I guess we're talking about here, is the cloud solution that TaxCalc offer is in fact the Cloud Connect. So Phil, you're probably better off positioning this than I, but the advantages of Cloud Connect kind of tick those boxes, right?
Yeah, I would say so, because you're essentially getting desktop performance via having an application on your device without the risk of hosting that database locally. So it's actually us hosting the database for you as opposed to the software, so it's different to hosting. But it also then means you don't have the negatives of browser-based software, which might be less feature-rich, but also the effects of browser lag.
Yes. Absolutely, and that's another issue that does come up. So, just to reiterate, the Cloud Connect is, and please correct me if I say any of this incorrectly, but the Cloud Connect relies on a hosted database whilst you still have your software installed locally. What that means is you don't have to worry about any backups. Wherever you are, you've got a laptop, you can take that with you. You can work wherever you like. And you don't have to worry about the servers. The bank grade security that's on the back of that gives you that security. So I guess what we're saying is, if you're a purist, then the processing isn't being done, but you do get the advantages of that solidity of having the technology installed locally, but the advantages of the cloud.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Billie, when you're working with customers, and I believe you've put a number of your customers onto TaxCalc and Cloud Connect. How are they getting on with that? What's been their experience?
This is a positive, but they haven't really noticed. I think is probably it's a really good thing. I think with IT people only really notice when things go wrong. The support's been incredible. I've had really good feedback about the support that people have received. But when it comes to actual Cloud Connect, the main feedback we've been getting is if they've moved over from a competitor, the price is a lot lower, which is fantastic. But as I say, there's this relief that they are not having to worry about the security of their data. From the practice owner's point of view, they've got everything that they could need, but without that sort of niggling burden in the back of the mind that something could go wrong or the data might corrupt or something, because it's being dealt with elsewhere. So there's no issues with the server and everything in-house. So yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because the question that Barry sent, I hear this every single time I speak to a practice. They talk about their accounts production or tax production software, and they always say, when is X, Y, Z going to the cloud? And I have to bat it back and say, but why do you want it on the cloud? Because how many times have you produced a set of accounts on a laptop that's not the one you're sat on now? And I bet it's a handful, if ever, because they will always use the same machine. It could be anywhere. So it's exactly the same as having it installed on that machine and using it anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's just getting that messaging across is really important.
To the pragmatist who's really just looking for an outcome, then TaxCalc is already in the cloud at that point. So, Phil, would you have anything to add to that in the experiences that you have? I mean, the same with your clients. Do they notice?
No, to be honest. Like I say, I've been at TaxCalc now for just shy of 4 months, and I think there's a real appetite to move across to Cloud Connect. I think the reason for that appetite is because they feel like it can just completely reduces that security burden for them. And those that have moved across, again, it's very, very quick to set up. It's very easy to migrate their database if they're an existing TaxCalc customer into that cloud database. And then from a new customer perspective, they don't know any different. It's very quick to move them from a trial version to being in Cloud Connect.
So straight onto Cloud Connect. Yeah. And what about, Billy, if you've got someone who is already using, so it's some tax software out there that is already purely native in the cloud. People that are coming from those solutions, how are they experiencing it?
Yeah, absolutely. If I say, I think there isn't like a huge difference to what they're doing. It's just the way they actually access the data. But from whether it be one of the team's point of view or the practice owner's point of view, they're still getting the same functionality. And I think this is the messaging that I'm speaking to a lot of practices about at the moment is, rather than focusing so much on the cloud or where that data is or what it's doing, obviously there's a security element of it. It's the functionality that's key. And I think sometimes we're finding people are trying to compromise on functionality within a system because it's on the cloud. And when you actually ask that question and you break down, you sit and you have that conversation, it's amazing how many practice owners sit there and think, oh, actually, why was that an issue? And they realise that they've actually been kind of swept away with this messaging that we've seen online or at conferences that is actually not as important as initially thought.
Which is wonderful to hear. And we just had a comment, thank you very much, Chris, who said we've been using Cloud Connect for 2 tax seasons now, and the transition was seamless, and we've never had reason to consider reversing that decision. Chris, thank you very much for that. Okay, so I think we've probably covered off a lot of what we wanted to discover. And I think really the message here is, when you're looking at the cloud, you really got to think why you want to use it. What is it going to bring you? And is having the data being processed off-site really important to you, or is it really about having the ability to go anywhere and the security, which are phenomenally important reasons? So it'd be worthwhile just having a little recap. If we can bring up the slides, please. Let's have a look at the pros and cons of a cloud-based solution. Absolutely 24/7 access. You've got remote client collaboration, access to any device, work anywhere on any machine. I think certainly when you've got a cloud-based solution and you're working, for example, with bookkeeping, and you're working directly with your clients on it, there is absolutely no doubt that a native cloud solution is essential. There's no question about that. But there can be issues around sluggish response. There can be internet outages which can bring you down. If we can go on to the next slide, because on the flip side, there are some server-based solutions that are out there and still being used primarily in that back office environment for the tax and the account software. And yes, they're more stable. And batch processing becomes a lot more easy. And you tend to own the license as well. You're not renting something, and I know that's very important to a lot of our customers. But working collaboratively isn't wonderful. But if you're not working collaboratively on your tax returns, then I guess that's less important. And then the next slide really just looks at how the TaxCalc's Cloud Connect solution does cover the bases that you need. So you've got the processing being done on your machine. It's a lot faster, it's a lot more responsive, but you are no longer worried about the integrity of your data, the security of your data. You can work anywhere, and you don't need to rely on expensive servers that Phil mentioned. So, thank you very much for coming along today. I sincerely hope that the discussion here has stimulated your thinking, and I hope we've answered any questions that you have. Obviously, if you do want to follow up with any specific questions, I'll flash up the contact details for our sales department on the screen. So please get in touch with sales@taxcalc.com, and they'll be able to take care of any specific questions that you have. We will next be with you on the 15th of March when we're going to be looking at HMRC investigations and providing the latest updates on the flags that they're looking for and the tactics that HMRC investigators are using right now. Until then, a massive thank you once again to Billie Mcloughlin and Phil Cottrell. Thanks very much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.